Hi girls, and welcome to our third unit of biology, which is actually going to be about chemistry. And you may be thinking, well, why in the world do we need to study chemistry in biology? And it's because that the reason we're alive is because of chemistry. And if any of you go on to anatomy and physiology, the whole physiology part of anatomy is talking about chemistry. So to assume that this is going to be a review for most of you, but as you go through these notes, please have the notes handout and e-backpack open, and you can fill that in as we zip through this information. So the first term that you need to know is atom. And when we talk about atoms, sometimes you hear the phrase the building blocks of matter. Matter being anything that has mass and takes up space. So the smallest unit of matter that we can think of is an atom. And this term's been around for quite some time. Democritus, about 2,500 years ago, was a Greek philosopher, and he was who came up with this term. And his thought process behind it was this. Could you take something, like a sheet of paper, and rip it in half, and rip it in half, and rip it in half, and rip it in half again? He was wondering, would you ever get to a point in time where the piece of matter that you had was so small that it would actually turn into something else? And Democritus thought, yes, there had to be a limit, and he came up with a word to represent that, atomos, which means unable to be cut. The smallest piece of matter that can exist, you cannot get any smaller than that. Which that theory held, water for many, many, many years, and it's only been in recent times that we've realized that we can look at things even smaller than an atom. So if matter is made of atoms, what is an atom made out of? Well, it has three basic parts, and that's as far as we will go in this chemistry unit. But we call these subatomic particles. Subatomic meaning smaller than an atom, and you can see in the picture that they're the proton, the neutron, and the electron. This chart shows you a lot of information about these subatomic particles. If we look at the protons and the neutrons and you look at their relative mass, you can see that their mass is given as a 1 atomic mass unit. We don't use pounds or kilograms or any notation of that sort when we're talking about masses of subatomic particles. It's just too small. Protons and neutrons, if you look at the last column of the chart, live very happily together in the nucleus. And the reason that they can do that is because of the charges of each of those. So a proton has a positive 1 charge, and a neutron has no charge at all. So they do not attract each other, they do not repulse each other, they're just able to coexist very nicely in the nucleus. Far away from the nucleus is the electron. And the electron has a negative charge, and it's very small. 1/1840th of an atomic mass unit. Or you would need 1,840 electrons to equal the mass of 1 proton or 1 neutron. So tiny little guys. They continue to orbit around the nucleus. We'll talk about them orbiting in shells. Different books use different terminology, but basically there are locations where we think we would be likely to find an electron, but we cannot be sure. We just know that they are outside the nucleus and that they move in these orbitals, and they are constantly in motion. And if you look at the charges, if you have 7 protons and 7 electrons, those charges would cancel out, and that is very, very typical for an atom to be electrically neutral, to not have a charge at all. And it's when we start gaining or losing electrons that we start seeing different charges showing up, and we give our atoms a special name, but that comes later. So when we take a whole bunch of a single type of atom, we get an element. And the elements are listed on a periodic table. And you should have on your iPad an app that has a periodic table on it. You can look one up There's one in lab notebooks. You can pull one off the internet. Very, very common. You've probably used them before. The periodic table is laid out in a very special way, and you'll learn about that a lot more in chemistry class. Right now we are looking at just a few elements when we're talking about biology, and the elements that we're going to use are these: carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. And if you like it that order, you can kind of think of it as being schnapps. Just kind of helps you remember. This makes up almost all of our body. It comes from just these 6 elements. So here's a picture of the periodic table. We're going to learn a little bit about these numbers mean. Just kind of a basic layout. You can see that it is color coordinated, and those colors do represent different parts of the table. So when we talk about a single element on the periodic table, it's represented with a couple numbers around it. So in order on the periodic table, the elements are arranged in increasing order of their atomic number. And this number is very, very important. It is telling you the number of protons in an atom. And the proton is what makes an atom who it is. It is its identifier, and the number of neutrons can change and the number of electrons can change, but the number of protons can never, ever, ever change. In a neutral atom, it will also be the number of electrons. And for right now, our atoms are all going to be neutral. So this particular element, carbon, has the atomic number of 6. It tells us it has 6 protons and 6 electrons. At the bottom is the atomic mass, and this is equal to the number of protons and the number of neutrons. This particular picture calls it atomic weight. We really should call it atomic mass. So if I knew the mass was 12, and I knew the atomic number was 6, which is our number of protons, if I take 12 minus 6, that leaves me with 6, which will be the number of neutrons. So you can take a second here if you want to pause, and you can go and look at a periodic table, find nitrogen on the periodic table, and determine how many protons are in nitrogen. Or if you don't want to play this game, and you should, we're just going to go through. Nitrogen has atomic number 7 protons. Sulfur is atomic number 16 protons. And barium, Ba, on the periodic table, 56 protons. Well, just by knowing an element's atomic number and atomic mass, you can very easily figure out what is the element, or how many neutrons there are, how many protons, and how many electrons. And there's an assignment you'll work on where you'll do that. But these atoms don't always come in just one flavor. We have what is known as isotopes. And isotopes occur when an element has different numbers of neutrons. So remember, protons never change. Electrons are going to be equal to protons for right now, so we can have varying numbers of neutrons. We will know that it is an isotope because we will write the name of the element with a dash followed by its mass number. So we know that carbon has 6 protons, no matter what. Carbon has 6 protons. So when we talk about carbon 11, that tells us that there would be 5 neutrons. 6 plus 5 is 11. Carbon 12, the most common form of carbon, will have 6 protons. 12 minus 6 tells us 6 neutrons. Carbon 13 would have 7 neutrons, and carbon 14 would have 8 neutrons. So the mass number is your total number of protons plus your total number of neutrons. So knowing the mass number, what is the carbon's mass, we can figure out which isotope it is. Another way to write isotopes is to put the mass number in a superscript, okay, high up in the air, on the left-hand side of the element symbol. And then the atomic number, the number right off the periodic table, would be the Z value, and that would be on the left-hand side, and it would be subscripted. So it would look like this. For boron, we know boron is element number 5 on the periodic table. This number up here is telling us it's an isotope. So if we look at this, boron has 5 protons, and it will always have 5 protons. And then if we take the mass number, 11, minus our number of protons, it'll tell us that this boron has 6 neutrons. So isotopes can be identified with this notation here, or we could have written it as this, boron-11 would have indicated that it was an isotope. And then, is the 5 necessary? Only if you didn't have a periodic table. You should be able to know that the 5 is representing the other. This chart is just showing you a different element. This is showing you potassium, whose element number 19. It never ever changes. And when we look at these numbers after it, this is the mass number. And simply by subtracting the mass number and the number of protons from that mass number, it will tell us our number of neutrons. Number of electrons doesn't change. Number of protons never changes, but the number of neutrons can change. Just one more example. Because these all have the same number of electrons and the same number of protons, all of these isotopes have the same chemical properties. They are hard to distinguish. The number of neutrons is the only thing that is different. So this page is showing you that you can have isotope notation written in this manner with the symbol and the mass number, or you can use the written out notation where you write the name of the element with a dash and then the mass number. So isotopes, you noticed back on that carbon one that some of them said they were stable and some said they were unstable. And the ones that are unstable tend to break down. And the ones that break down, we say that they are radioactive. And that sounds really, sometimes radiation is harmful. You could think of, when you go to a nuclear power plant, that it's being run by this type of radiation. Radiation, obviously can help break down cells. You can think about that in terms of cancer treatment. So it does have some harmful aspects to it. Radiation from the sun can be very harmful. Also some positive things. We've talked about cancer treatment. Positive if it's killing the cancer cells. Negative if it's killing other cells. Tracers. It can be used to identify blockages in the system. You may have to drink a radioactive solution that maybe has some barium in it, and it will follow, you'll be able to follow it through your body and see if there is a blockage. And we have radioactive dating. As fossils break down, the carbon changes and breaks down, the isotopes break down, and we're able to tell how old things are. So now your notes should be filled out. You do have a worksheet to try that kind of goes through these notes. Use your notes. You can refer back to this video. You can use your textbook and work with each other. And then there will also be a Texas homework that goes along with this. All right. Hopefully this makes sense, and good luck on your homework.